Welcome back to the Prep Extra podcast. I'm Colton Stone, alongside, as always, Chris Basnett. We had a little bit of a get-right week of our own.
We needed it.
Last week. We needed one. It's a long season.
Had a little adversity,
That's
you and
right,
I.
yeah.
A little under the weather,
battling.
both of us, but we're back.
Yep, we're here. We've kept our finger on the pulse, so
That's right.
we're not out of touch by any means, but yes, definitely.
Well, we might be a little out of touch.
Maybe a little,
yeah.
sure. Chris, we were talking about it. It's Huskers play on a Friday night. Doesn't happen ever, hardly.
Yeah, it kind of messes everything up.
So this past Friday seemed kind of like a blur. It's kind of like we lost everything in the shuffle. But there were a few games to maybe recap and look back at. A couple city games, two that you were at: Lincoln East, Lincoln High, which feels like it was
a week and a half ago. Yeah,
2 weeks ago. And then you had Lincoln Lutheran and Malcolm. Also, just to circle back to the week we missed, Westside finally has a loss on their book.
Yep.
Kearney now has 2 losses.
Yeah.
So it seems like not much has really changed in the top half of Class A, but some of those teams that we said, hey, maybe look out for them. I think we're getting back to a reshuffling moment where it's like, okay, the 4 teams we thought were in contention are still those 4 teams.
Yeah, and that's basically what I wrote on the top of my rankings this week. It seems like everybody's kind of settled in, to their spots. You look at the ratings this week, and Class A, for example, top 5 teams won, number 6 had a bye, 7 and 8 both lost, and it's basically that all the way down through D6. So it's crazy to think about, but we're less than 2 weeks away from playoff football. 8-man D1, D2 start on October 20th, so we're 10 days away as of Monday afternoon. So it's kind of getting down to it. We have a pretty good idea where these teams are right now. You always learn something every week. Like you mentioned, Malcolm, Lincoln Lutheran. I learned Malcolm's pretty darn good, and I think they can make a run in C2 with what I saw. Hayden Frank at quarterback's a spectacular athlete, and he played a spectacular game on Friday night. And you go back to Thursday night, Lincoln East, Lincoln High. That was basically a playoff elimination game, and Lincoln East, it was tie game at half. It's kind of the story of Lincoln High's season. Tie game at halftime. Lincoln East pulled away in the second half. They win that game. Dash Bauman recovers a fumble, returns a pick for a touchdown, runs for 2 touchdowns. Kind of single-handedly did it against the Lynx. So East keeps their playoff hopes alive. Lincoln High, I guess mathematically, still probably is alive, but it's going to be tough. They've got some work to do. These last couple weeks, they're going to have to pull a couple upsets to make it happen. So you're kind of starting to see some teams, be eliminated or get to be on the brink of elimination. You're seeing other teams kind of either stay alive or kind of lock in those spots, and that's kind of where we're at right now. And that's kind of what this week is about too, just making sure those teams that are in, make sure you don't stumble. And those teams that are on the edge, kind of the same thing. You don't want to stumble. You want to win your game and stay alive as long as you can. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, it's kind of that chance to either, maybe just solidifies you, not coast. You never want to coast, of course, but you do want a little bit of pressure taken off you down the backstretch these last couple of games. And if you're a team that's, maybe completely out of it, you still want to rise up against one of these big teams, and maybe you catch them lacking a little bit, and maybe you can jump up there. But yeah, it's. Frankly, the next couple of weeks, I don't think we're going to see much change. I think we kind of know what to expect.
Yeah, I think that's where it is. Are there going to be surprises? Sure, there always are. A last-second field goal or something crazy happening in a game. You never know with injuries, all those sorts of things. But it feels like the teams that are in the top 10 in all these classes now are probably mostly going to be there in 2 weeks, and then. It's the old saying, everybody starts over 0-0 when the playoffs gets here. So playoffs, I think, are going to be awesome. I think there's going to be some really fun matchups throughout all the classes. We can worry about that when it gets here, and we'll break that all down when it gets here. But for now, like you said, it's about teams that are in, continuing to make sure that they stay in. Teams that are on the outside doing what they have to do to climb into that conversation. That's where it's at as we kind of head into these last couple weeks of the season.
Yeah, speaking of last-second win, Cross County.
Yeah.
An incredible Hail Mary. Seemed like it was all but over, quite literally.
It pretty much was.
Yeah, and to come back and get a 1-point win in a ranked matchup.
Yeah, I actually went back and watched the end of that on YouTube because I was curious how it happened. And Clarkson Lee scored with like 35 seconds left to take the lead, to go up 28-24. Got the 2-pointer to go up 28-24. Cross County has a kickoff return out to about their own 25, hit a pass interference, get about an 8-yard run, 10-yard run. All of a sudden they're on the 25-yard line going the other way with 6 seconds left. And it was kind of a funny Hail Mary, right? Like you watch it and it wasn't like there was 6 or 7 bodies going up for the ball. They threw it, and I want to make sure I get the guys' names right. Lucas Jacobson was your quarterback in that game, and he threw it into the edge of the end zone. And Jackson Lindbergh, just for right when the ball got there, was all of a sudden just all alone. And he didn't even have to jump to catch the ball. He just kind of stood there and caught it, and that was the game winner as time ran out. So it was kind of a funky looking Hail Mary. He had kind of 2 guys in front of him, and then he was just kind of right there, and it was just kind of weird looking. But yeah, Cross County, number 2, beats number 4 Clarkson Lee on a Hail Mary. Second one we've seen this year, Elm Creek, shout out to the Buffaloes a few weeks ago, hitting a Hail Mary as well, and they win that game. And that was kind of the biggest test for both those teams. You go back and look at the scores for those teams, and Cross County, who's been great the last several seasons, has just been blowing people out. Kind of the same for Clarkson Lee, and we kind of knew this would be the biggest test for both of them. Turned out that was the case, and Cross County came out right at the end. We'll see if they meet up again in the playoffs. But yeah, that was kind of the highlight, I think, from last week for sure.
Yeah, really. Looking back, nothing, like I may have said it up at the top, but nothing really jumped out from last week. I think it was kind of, I expected this. So, that team seemed hot and they finally ran into a brick wall. Not really not surprised by anything last week.
Yeah, maybe a little surprised just with the scores. Kearney and Grand Island both lost last week. Kearney to Omaha Westside, 42-14. I thought that might be a little closer, just considering Kearney's win over Bellevue West earlier in the year and the way Bellevue West played Westside when those 2 teams matched up. Grand Island loses to Elkhorn South 42-3. 2 blowouts of 2 teams that have been playing pretty good. Grand Island just beat Kearney the week before. So if you're looking for a surprise in Class A, that's probably it. But at the same time, that just tells you, again, like we've talked about all year, we know the Metro and Omaha's, that's where the strength is. And that kind of showed it, I think, last Friday. We'll get another kind of test of that this Friday. Lincoln Southwest hosts Millard West on Thursday night. Big game for the Silverhawks, who right now are in contention to host a playoff game, which would be enormous for them, to have to avoid having to travel to Omaha or Kearney or wherever it may be, in that first round. If you can get that first round host and win that game, then you just kind of see where things fall after that. But that's a big game. Millard West knocked off Southeast last week, 17-16, and Southwest beat Southeast in overtime 2 weeks ago. So you have to figure Thursday night that's going to be a close game, one that Southwest kind of needs to win, I think, if they want to be a serious contender to get one of those top 8 seeds, host a home game in the playoffs.
Yeah, really looking at next week, again, not that anything is – these aren't necessarily bad games. It's just a matter of – I feel like we've got a good sample size. We know what to expect out of teams, so it's almost more about, who's going to be a surprise. I mean, looking at that Millard West-Southwest game, on paper you'd think, okay, well, Southwest, it seems like they've kind of got something rolling here. Yeah. What could be a challenge for them with that game?
Well, it's interesting. What's Southwest's one loss? It's Papillion La Vista, Metro team, who at the time was 0-3. And Southwest kind of goes into that game, and everybody's kind of thinking, well, okay, they win that one, they might win them all. And they lose it by 2 touchdowns, they never lead the whole game, or led for a very short amount of time. I forget how exactly the scoring broke down, but I think that tells you that nothing's a given, right? Kind of like you were saying, should Southwest be favored? Probably. If you were going to lay odds on it, I don't know if I'd give them a touchdown. Yeah. But, I think it'll be a close game. Can Southwest kind of apply, what it learned from that Papio game now to the Millard West game? Again, a game that's very important for Southwest. Game that's really important for Millard West. They win that, all of a sudden now they're kind of jumping up into that right. playoff contention. So it's a big game both ways. So yeah, I think it's a matter for Southwest of can you take the lessons you learned from Papio, apply them to this game. You get them at home. They've got to do the traveling. You can just ride the bus up from southwest corner of town and play at Seacrest and can you take care of business? If they do that, I think you feel pretty good about where Southwest is heading into the postseason.
Yeah, and then looking at your Friday night games, plenty of city flavor, of course. Parkview Christian got another big win last week. Still think probably the odds-on favorite to make the longest run in the city. six-man looks daunting. I mean,
Yeah.
it always seems to look daunting when you look at the scores from the western half of the state and trying to apply, 57-8, that's a good win for Parkview, but then you're like, well, you're looking at Potter Dick's score.
It's 79-0.
You're looking at Cody Kilgore score 80 points. Like, it's just a matter of, I think they can maybe just kind of cruise through these last few games, but I don't know what there is for them to maybe get ready for one of those Western teams.
It's maybe the hardest class to compare because the teams are just so spread out.
Yeah.
We know Potter Dix is really good. They made the state final last year. Cody Kilgore won it last year, but they're 300 miles away. And even Parkview being in Lincoln, they're the only six-man team in the city. They're having to go out and play some different teams. The one team they've played kind of from out west, if you want to call it that, SEM, which is just northwest of Kearney a little ways. It was a 4-point game, and Parkview was without one of their best players in that game after an early injury. So it's really, really hard to compare, and all you can do is, like you said, look at the scores, and the scores are kind of eye-popping when you look at the Potter Dixes, the Cody Kilgores, the Arthur Counties of the world. So, yeah, it's tough to put a finger on what that might look like when the postseason does get here.
Yeah, I'd say maybe another interesting matchup for the city. You've got Lincoln East, who has a real chance against North Star to maybe solidify themselves as a playoff team. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I think they've found a stride. I don't know if it's like the stride, but they've found one to, they're kind of poised to maybe build something here in these last couple of weeks.
They've won a couple games now without Malachi Coleman, who was injured last week, didn't play. And I think that says a lot about them. And excuse me, it certainly has to give them a lot of confidence. You're talking about obviously a 4-star athlete, a guy that's going to choose his college destination later this week. We know what he's about. But they've also proven they can win some important games without him. And you're playing a North Star team that is much, much, much improved this year under James Thompson, first-year head coach. They were really competitive last week against Norfolk. Norfolk scored late to win that game. North Star, couldn't quite get it done at the end of that game. That tells you how far they've come. This isn't going to be a cakewalk for East, I don't think, by any means. Excuse me, still recovering from my illness here, but it's a deal where East has to show up. This isn't a game where you just walk over somebody. North Star's going to be ready to play. They want to win this game. They want to send a little bit of a message and carry some momentum through the end of the season into next year. So, yeah, as far as the city games go, that's probably the one you look at and go, okay, that one could be really interesting if North Star makes some things happen in the first half.
Yeah, and I look around the area and the state, again, not too many things that I'm like, wow, I got to make sure that I know what's happening here. Waverly rolls through Pius last week.
Another ranked game for Waverly this week. Seems like they play one every week.
Yep, they've got Seward this week. That Waverly defense is just so good.
Mm-hmm. It's tough.
You jump out. What we said it 2 weeks ago. If you can get up 10, up 14, I mean, it's pretty much lights out.
Yeah.
Waverly, I think, kind of just keeps rolling. Again, top 5 teams in their classes. I think they kind of just get things done. Ashland Greenwood's got Ron Colley at home this week.
That's a good test, I think, for Ashland Greenwood. That's another 6-1 team out of Omaha. Ashland Greenwood's only losses to Aurora, which everybody's losing to Aurora. You don't put much in that.
Yeah, that's right.
How do they kind of match up against a team that's maybe a little more their peer, so to speak? I think that's going to give us a good indication of how the Blue Jays might maybe fare when the playoffs get here. They've had a really nice year, and this is a game against a team that's maybe it's more of a fair fight in a sense. Aurora's just a head and shoulders above everybody else in C1 right now, except maybe Pierce, and those two teams wouldn't meet until it was the playoffs. So we'll see what that looks like. But yeah, that's a good test, I think, for the Blue Jays here down the stretch. Yeah, and then just looking around the rest of the state, again, I think we're just in a place where you can almost look at, I know they're your ratings, so there's a little bit of bias behind it, but you look at the ratings and what teams have done, and nothing screams as like, yeah, I see an upset here. So I think it's going to be maybe not super chalky this week, but I think we're going to see the top 5 teams, again, just solidify themselves as the top 5 teams. Speaking of chalky, we should probably give a shout out to Lincoln East Tennis.
We should,
State tennis tournament starts later this week. Lincoln East has not dropped a set all season at number 1 singles, number 2 singles, number 1 doubles, number 2 doubles. That's never, if they complete it this week, they'll be the first Class A team to ever do that. And that's insane to think about. When you think about just the number of matches you play, the number of sets you play, the number of points you play. Spartans, you're talking about, like historical stuff, like best team in state history type stuff. You've got the 4 divisions, you've got 4 number 1 seeds, they're all unbeaten, none of them have lost a set. So kind of a cool piece of history to kind of keep an eye on later this week. We'll have full coverage of that when it gets here. Class A state tournament is in Omaha, Class B in Lincoln. But yeah, the Spartans trying to do something really special, finish off something really special later this week. Also state softball, Lincoln East again, among the favorites there, Lincoln Southwest. Trying to go back to back. Is it Southwest trying to go back to back or East trying to go back to back?
I believe it's Southwest.
They met in the finals last year.
That's right.
We know that.
Maybe they'll meet again.
Maybe they'll meet again. We'll see. That starts later this week. So we're to that point in the year. The state tournaments are starting to get here. Again, football playoffs start in less than 2 weeks with D1, D2. So it's getting to that fun time of year. We'll have more for you throughout the week in the paper, on the website. We'll have the podcast again next week. So until next time, for Colton, I'm Chris. Thanks for tuning in.